Well, as those delegates struggle to agree on the future of climate funding, many are questioning the role the United States will play under a second Trump presidency. So here's a look at what a second Trump term could mean for the fight against climate change.
First, we're going to drill, baby, drill.
It's no secret Trump's America First agenda puts economy over environment. After a particularly strong hurricane season that was intensified by climate change, many worry about a second Trump term.
Trump and his supporters have a different view, clearly, on climate policy. View that oil and gas is really central to America's global strength, and that shouldn't be toyed with.
A second U.S. exit from the Paris Agreement and possibly the UN climate framework will risk U.S. commitments to global climate finance, crucial for developing nations transitioning to clean energy. Trump's influence may already be spreading globally. Argentina's Javier Milei, a self-proclaimed Trump fan, withdrew negotiators from the ongoing COP29 climate talks. Trump has controversial plans to expand fossil fuel drilling, even in areas like Alaska's Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, which threatens entire ecosystems. One analysis warned that Trump's future policies could add 4 billion tons of emissions by 2030. That's as much as the EU's and Japan's annual emissions combined. Some fear the new administration will also abandon Biden's Inflation Reduction Act, which pumped hundreds of billions of dollars into a clean energy transition. But experts say pulling out of the IRA will not be that simple.
There are sections of the Inflation Reduction Act, which has been really wildly successful in driving clean energy manufacturing and jobs across the country, but particularly to so-called red states, which are receiving about 70% of the investments from the Inflation Reduction Act.
With federal climate leadership in question, state governors are doubling down on local climate commitments. Washington State Governor Jay Inslee led a delegation from the U.S. Climate Alliance to COP29 to stress the urgency of regional leadership on climate change. And states like California, which, if a country, would have the 5th biggest economy on the planet, are already positioning themselves to sustain renewable efforts, regardless of federal policy changes. With renewable energy costs falling and state commitments growing, clean energy momentum may still persist in the U.S., even under Trump's administration.
And we'll more on the likely effects of Trump in just a moment with DW's chief climate change reporter, Louise Osborne. Welcome, Louise. But ahead of that, there's been a development at COP.
That's right. There has been a new text that has just come out. This is a proposal on what a deal could actually look like. They have come up with a figure now for climate financing, which would be the money to help developing countries deal with the impacts of climate change and develop in a way that is not focusing on fossil fuels. Currently, the pledges for that are $100 billion. That was up until 2020. They're renegotiating that figure now. And this new text has proposed a figure of $250 billion, which is a lot lower than I know developing countries were hoping to get. They were looking for a figure that was closer to $1 trillion.
So this is a new offer. It hasn't been signed off yet?
No, not yet.
OK, so this is the next step in the negotiation.
Exactly.
All right. So we've been talking about the US, the likely shape of US policy with the election of Donald Trump. We saw his plans to move the US out of the Paris Agreement the last time. How much influence have US negotiators had at this year's conference?
I mean, obviously, the negotiators going into the conference this time are from the Biden administration, but they have been under a huge amount of pressure because they know, obviously, that from January it will be President-elect Trump taking over that office, and that it is likely that the US will then be pulled out of the Paris Agreement. That means that, they've had while they've been trying to constructively engage themselves in negotiations, experts have said they obviously are unable to make any real promises when it comes to this financing because they don't know what is going to happen post Trump being inaugurated. That is likely to have had an effect on the kind of figure that we're seeing coming out as a proposal for climate finance.
OK. And on President Biden's Inflation Reduction Act, which has led to big investments in renewable energy, ironically, in lots of states that voted for Donald Trump. If this happened and the IRA was repealed, what sort of impact would that have globally?
I mean, it's unlikely that it would be completely repealed because there are parts of it that have been very beneficial in Republican states, investment into renewable energy that has provided jobs there, etc. But the problem is that the US is the second biggest emitter. If it pulls out of the Paris Agreement, it won't be under obligation to reduce its emissions. And Trump has already stated many times his intentions to invest in oil and gas, which means his focus is not going to be on renewables. That doesn't stop the train as it's going at the moment already, because obviously there is a lot of investment that has been put into renewables, but it's likely to slow down, the US reduction of carbon emissions, at least.
OK. And as far as active participation, then, in global climate diplomacy, is the US a lame duck at the moment?
It's a lame duck with regards to these negotiations, but it has always been the case that there have been states and cities within the US that say that they want to keep committing to carbon reduction goals despite what the federal government does. And they will look at, investing and making sure that they are looking at renewables, which, is really important to make the US competitive against countries like China and Europe, etc. So those commitments will stay in place with the states anyway.
Thank you for that, Louise. DW's Chief Climate Reporter, Louise Osborne.